It is kind of obvious that a phone cannot create footage with the same quality as a camera, and physics will always be the limit for mobile phones. But with some advanced software features that the S25 Ultra introduced, I personally started using it more and more as a content creation tool instead of my Sony camera, and even made a few videos using only the phone. Naturally, I got a bit curious about how close the quality of the S25 Ultra is compared to my Sony cinema camera, which with lenses costs around €5,000. I am Mo, and I went to the center of Vienna, the capital of Australia, to gather as much information as I could. I'm also going to tell you the tools I use for creating the videos on this channel, and none of the brands I mentioned today are sponsoring this video. Let's start with the blind test. Guess if the Galaxy S25 Ultra is a camera A or camera B. The first footage is from Opera House in Vienna. Right before sunset, I shot in log on both cameras and did the color grading later. The second footage is of a random building in Vienna, in front of which a talented street artist was singing opera. The third footage is shot with 3x zoom of the lady who was singing, and the sound you are hearing was also captured by the Galaxy phone. And you probably guessed it right. The first footage was from the Galaxy S25 Ultra, and the second was from the Sony FX30. Most likely, the third video totally gave it away, and I will tell you why. But before we continue, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Let's grow the community to 100,000 subscribers this year. The Galaxy S25 Ultra has 4 cameras, each with its own sensor, and the size of each sensor is different. Sensor size is one of the primary factors in how well the phone can gather light. On the other hand, even though I have 4 lenses for the Sony camera, they all use a single sensor. If you compare the size of the main sensor of the Sony and Galaxy, the difference is big, but nothing crazy, and the results speaks for themselves. The Galaxy, fairly decent main sensor, combined with the advanced algorithm running in the background, including denoising, helps the phone keep up with the Sony camera, even though you can still see the Sony footage is richer. Especially during daylight, when there is enough light in the scene, it is very difficult to tell the difference between the phone and the camera. But things change when we switch to the telephoto lens on the Galaxy, especially the 3x telephoto lens, which is the phone's weakest point. The small sensor size of the 3x telephoto lens has a huge impact on the quality of the footage. The footage from the Galaxy lacks the details needed to be compared to a real camera, and no amount of AI can save it. Here another example. First, I'm using the longest zoom range on my Sony camera lens, and the footage looks quite good. But when switching to the Galaxy, we see an immediate drop in quality, even though I'm using all the tools I'll show you to get the best footage possible. On the other hand, you should note that the zoom lenses on real cameras are extremely heavy, and it is not uncommon for them to weigh a kilogram. And that's why I rarely carry them around. In situations like this, I can take videos of birds or distant objects. Even though the 20x zoom on the Galaxy S25 Ultra doesn't offer the best quality, it is still nice to zoom in a little and capture some fun shots. The zoom on the Galaxy combined with AI enhancements can be useful when you want to take pictures of distant objects. For example, the Galaxy can zoom in on the statue on top of the building without any problem. It can even capture airplanes passing by. Of course, if I had a zoom lens on the Sony, I could achieve the same results, but those lenses are heavy and expensive to carry around while traveling. And if you zoom in only, let's say, 10 times on a subject, the Galaxy's picture is more than acceptable. Also, the 5x telephoto lens on the S25 Ultra has a better quality, so maybe try to use that instead of the 3x telephoto lens. Like here, of course, it is no surprise that the Galaxy S25 Ultra footage with 5x zoom looks less professional, but it is still somehow comparable to footage coming out of a real camera. One thing that the S25 Ultra does a better job at is image stabilization. It is just easier to stabilize the image of a smallest sensor. Also, the chipsets in these phones are crazy. I know a lot of people always ask why we need more processing power on a phone, and the answer is usually for image and video processing. For example, the footage from the Galaxy S25 Ultra is quite stable, but the moment we switch to the Sony Alpha FX30, the image becomes shaky. To avoid shaky footage, I usually use a gimbal. The one I have for the camera is the Hohem ISD MT2. I want to emphasize again that it is not a sponsored section. As you can see, I also use an ND filter on the camera to better manage shutter speed. I also use the Hohem ISD M7 for the phone along with the ND filter. You can get an expensive ND filter or more affordable one, like the newer clip-in version. I link all of them in the description. One thing I realized over the past few weeks using this dual setup is that the gimbal is much more enjoyable when I use it with the phone, since I hardly need to balance it at all. Balancing the gimbal for the camera, on the other hand, can be a bit of a hassle. It takes time and patience, or maybe I'm just not good at this. If I want to take videos in the city for vlogging or just for myself as a tourist, I'll definitely go for the phone plus gimbal setup instead of a camera plus gimbal setup. But that's just me. There's another interesting thing that the Galaxy S25 Ultra may be a better choice for. And let's do another quick blind test. Here, you can see the camera A again, and you should decide whether this footage looks nicer or if you prefer camera B, which is slightly different from what you saw with camera A. Camera is the Galaxy S25 Ultra and camera B is the Sony. The interesting thing is that some people actually prefer camera A because it is sharper. Even though I'm shooting a log, the footage from the Galaxy is still very sharp with edge enhancements using various AI and machine learning algorithms like edge detection. The footage from the Sony is softer, and this is intentional. I usually choose lenses that aren't overly sharp because they give the footage a more natural look. However, we've been conditioned to prefer the over-sharpened look of a phone footage due to social media. That over-sharpened look can be nice when taking photos of buildings. Here, I'm showing you pictures straight out of the cameras with no edits. Even at 5x zoom, the Galaxy footage is sharp and pleasant to look at, though the colors are a bit meh. Also, without any edits, the phone's HDR processing usually gives it better dynamic range than a real camera, although you can fix that in Lightroom. You can also use portrait mode on the Galaxy or any other phone to artificially blur the background, and it works fairly well. It won't look as natural as the blur created by a larger sensor on a real camera, but the result is still more than acceptable. Even without portrait mode, if the subject is far from the background, like in this photo, you can still achieve that blur effect on the Galaxy S25 Ultra. Another reason I usually choose a real camera over a phone is that the camera has physical buttons, making it much faster and easier to control everything. On a phone, you only have a touchscreen for capturing videos. I usually use Pro Video mode on the Galaxy, where I turn on log and enable zebra patterns to check if highlights are being clipped. I also make sure I'm shooting in 4K and 30 frames per second. I only switch to 60 frames per second when I want slow motion. You can manually set the white balance to any value, though here it is on auto. If I have an ND filter on, I set the shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. If I don't, I set it as low as possible. There's also a new zoom rocker on the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which allows for a smooth zooming into the subject, as I did here with the bird. And here, you can see the result of the footage I just shot, compared side by side with the Sony FX30 after color grading. Even though the S25 Ultra doesn't have physical buttons, it has a much larger screen, which is nicer to use as a viewfinder compared to the smaller, lower quality screen on cameras. In the field, people usually use an external monitor when shooting with a mirrorless camera. Another nice thing about the Galaxy is that it is small and can always be in my pocket. Because of this small form factor and lightweight design, I can even use it as an action cam, either attached to my neck or mounted on my bicycle. Nighttime is where you start to notice an even bigger quality difference between the two, as the smallest sensor on the Galaxy becomes a limiting factor. When there's still sunlight before sunset, the Galaxy performs really well, and the footage from the main lens is still usable. However, as it gets darker, the quality starts to drop, as you can see in the Galaxy's footage. Modern cameras like the Sony FX30 performs well at their native ISO even in low light. When comparing the footage side by side using the main lens, the biggest difference more than just quality is that the color science and auto-white balance is different, which aren't as easy to fix in post on the Galaxy. Also, the telephoto zoom on the Galaxy performs even worse at night since its sensor is even smaller than the main one. If you change the lens on the Sony camera to a faster one with a lower aperture like 15mm f1.4, the quality on the Sony is gonna increase substantially, even at complete darkness. Here I am holding the phone in my hand and shooting with the main lens on the Galaxy S25 Ultra, and the result is somewhat mixed. Switching to the Sony Alpha FX30, you can immediately see that the video is sharper, more detailed, and less noisy. The background is also nicely blurred due to a lower aperture on the new lens I just installed on the camera. In general, I don't find the quality of the log file on the Galaxy S25 Ultra to be great at night. The log footage that Samsung provides is rather limited, and doesn't compare to what you get from the Sony camera. For pictures, it is a different story, as the Galaxy processes images more easily and requires less raw power. However, the main issue with photos on the Galaxy at night is still the white balance, which tends to make everything look more yellow regardless of the original color and lighting. The zoom quality on the Galaxy is still usable, even though there is a visible drop in the quality. It still produces nice looking images. There are also a bunch of other things that I didn't cover, like how the glass on a real camera makes scenes look less flat, the better autofocus on the Sony, color science, and more. But the reality is that at the end of the day, most of these differences go unnoticed by audience on YouTube. I've made videos with the Galaxy S24 Ultra, iPhone, Pixel, my small Sony camera, and my Pro Sony camera, and none of them made the video more or less appealing or change audience retention. If you like the phone form factor, you can absolutely run a YouTube channel using only the Galaxy S25 Ultra. If you enjoyed this video, you can check out my camera comparison of the Vivo X200 Pro, which has a larger camera sensor versus a real camera next. Thanks for tuning into Techmo, and I will see you in the next one.